Jumping back now into the Chip Shot Football podcast here. We talked about the games tomorrow on Thursday, obviously with Thanksgiving. Now we're going to look ahead all the way to Sunday now and look at this dream matchup that we have on here between the Eagles and the Baltimore Ravens. Two teams that are playing some of the best football in the NFL as of right now. And, we're talking about two of the best offenses in the NFL as well. And one of the most anticipated games, I think, this year. I honestly didn't even know that they were playing already. But then when I looked at the schedule, I had to talk about it because this matchup is one of the best that we're going to see probably all this year. Philadelphia will visit Baltimore this upcoming Sunday, trying to extend their winning streak to 8 games as they come into this game at 9-2, while Baltimore just got back to winning ways after last week's win, or I should say this week's win, where we are right now on Monday Night Football against the Chargers. They now sit at 8-4, trying to keep up with the Steelers there for the AFC North, putting a lot more pressure on the Steelers to win their game against the Cincinnati Bengals. So that's kind of like the stipulations, what everyone's playing for at this point in time. But, Philadelphia have been one of the hottest teams in the NFL, if not, the hottest, right up there with Detroit. They sit at the number 2 spot right now in the playoffs with hopes of catching Detroit. We talked about it before. It's not something the Lions can just take as a given already that they've locked up the number 1 seed. With the way the Eagles are playing, I don't really see them losing maybe more than a game, honestly, the way that they're playing and the way that their offense is kind of humming right now, especially, we haven't even mentioned Saquon, right, and what he's doing. So all of that is something that they are still playing for. I'm sure they believe that they could get that number 1 seed if they continue doing what they're doing. While Baltimore right now, in terms of playoffs, they're sitting at the 5 seed right now, and they're not going to, they could go higher at the number 3 spot, depending on who wins that division. And like I said, keeping pressure on the Steelers is something that they're truly pushing for here. With another matchup later on coming up against the Steelers, they definitely feel that they could win that division, and having a home game in the playoffs is obviously huge and a lot different than being on the road for the entirety of it. So that's what they're also playing for. A lot is riding on this game for both teams, right? To keep pace with the Steelers or with the Lions in that regard, but also, just keeping things going, continue to improve. And going up against a team like this is always like a litmus test, right? It's always like proving yourself against teams. I titled this, Super Bowl preview, because both of these teams could very well end up there. So I think it's, by that standpoint and by that, margin, is super important, if anything, other than, the records and the playoffs and things like that. So that's also what, there is on the line. We have two of the most talented teams just in general as well. Two of the most stacked rosters in the NFL outside of Detroit, right? You have both of these teams. You have Jalen Hurts, you have Lamar Jackson, you have Derrick Henry, you have Saquon Barkley on the other side. Two great defensive lines, two teams with talent at the wide receiver spot, or just receivers in general. Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, Deontay Johnson just coming in there, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith on the other side, and I haven't even mentioned the defensive stars for the Eagles as well and how well they're playing. So every position you go through, everywhere you look, the Eagles' offensive line, they never get talked about, but there's stars everywhere, and that just attracts more eyes. It's going to make the game even more when you have truly the best of the best playing against each other and kind of responding to one another during the game. I am really hyping it up because I think it's going to be an awesome matchup to watch. And something else too to watch is, like I mentioned before, and all those kind of weird facts that we talked about, kind of like in relation to Detroit and Thanksgiving. Lamar Jackson, again, has only lost to one NFC team in his career, and that was to Daniel Jones and the New York Giants. He's won every other game against an NFC opponent up until this point. And, that's kind of on the line, right, with the Eagles and how well they're playing. Can they put another blemish on that record as well? It's something about Lamar in the NFC. He doesn't really lose to those teams, so forget about being in the Super Bowl, right? If he ever gets there, they're probably going to win based on this record. But besides that, and, kind of getting too far in advance of ourselves, looking at the Eagles a little bit closer, heading into this game. It hasn't been great for them because their longtime veteran, the last kind of member of that core group of players that they had with Fletcher Cox, Kelsey, and Brandon Graham, he unfortunately is going to be out for the remainder of 2024 because he suffered a tricep injury that will require surgery. So he is going to miss the rest of this year, including the playoffs and everything like that. In terms of injuries, also, Devontae Smith missed the last game that they had against the Rams, but even still, I feel like he's going to play in this game. I haven't seen too many injury updates, but it feels like he should be good to go in this matchup. So that's something to keep an eye on. But also, Darius Slay did not finish the game against the Rams either because he was dealing with a concussion. So we'll see how the Eagles monitor that as we go along. A very sensitive injury, obviously, when you're talking about the head and the brain and everything like that. So that is some of the injuries that they're dealing with. But regardless of all of that, they're showing how good they can be with all of this talent. Even when a couple guys go down like this, it doesn't really change the outlook on the Eagles really whatsoever. Darius Slay more so than Brandon Graham, obviously because of the significance that they bring to the team. But overall, you talk about this team and how deep it is in a lot of spots, right? You look at corner, you look at Darius Slay, Quinyon Mitchell playing great, Cooper DeJean, Reed Blankenship's having a great year, CJ Gardner-Johnson, excuse me. They're all playing very well, and they're everywhere, honestly, with how much depth they have. The offensive line and how healthy, too, they stay pretty much the entire year is a credit to them and just how well they've built up this team, right? Credit to Howie Roseman. But, what they do with this talent, there was some rough points in this year where the offense might not have looked well. The defense was missing a bunch of tackles and just really wasn't going after the quarterback. But that's also a credit to Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio, the two coordinators that they brought in, how great they have this team playing now and how they got them through that rough start, and now they're one of the best teams in the NFL. So that's one thing. And also another thing that they've become, kind of known for, especially in that last game against the Rams, the amount of explosive plays that they have each and every game, it seems like, right? It always seems like they break out one big run or a huge pass by Jalen Hurts to A.J. Brown or something like that. It always feels like they have something like that. And with that in mind, they lead the NFL in that regard. So something to watch out for, something where in a moment you feel like the Eagles aren't really doing much, but then just like that, they have a big play like that and it sparks everything. So that's what you get when you're dealing with all this talent on one team. And then just not that far off, you have the Baltimore Ravens, right? In terms of injuries, they missed Roquan Smith missed last game with a hamstring injury, and I'm assuming he's going to be good to go. He's listed as questionable, but you never really know with the hamstring injuries and how also sensitive they are when you're talking about the hamstring and soft tissue like that. So I'm assuming he's going to be out there. I don't think it's going to be that bad, but again, he's listed as questionable. And the biggest thing with them, I think, is always going to be the amount of times they use Derrick Henry. I think it's something like if they give him 20 carries or like 22 carries or more, they always win a game, and that's been a problem, right? You go back to the AFC Championship game last year without Derrick Henry, but then against the Steelers a couple weeks ago, the fact that they didn't use him more was always something that people are going to go to. So how much they continue to rely on Derrick in this game and using him relentlessly to kind of counter Saquon Barkley is going to be interesting to watch. But much like the Eagles, and we talked about them, all it takes is one big run for Derrick Henry to start kind of chugging and get into a flow state of sorts and really look unstoppable. So they also have their own firepower to fire back at the Eagles. But in terms of, we just mentioned Derrick Henry and Saquon, that's one of the matchups that I think is definitely going to decide this game. You have two MVP candidates, in my opinion, at the running back position, and really playing a big role in their offenses are squaring off against each other. They're both leading right now the NFL in rushing yards, and probably they're up there in scrimmage yards as well, I'd imagine. So these two guys are playing some of the best football in all of the NFL, quarterbacks included. So they're right up there in the MVP MVP competition, and overall, it's going to be a matter of who makes more plays, who impacts the team a lot more, that is going to resolve this game. And then from the running backs, you go to the quarterbacks, right? Jalen Hurts and Lamar Jackson, very similar in terms of the running ability, the great accuracy and arms that they bring. How are they deployed? Who has to throw the ball a lot more, based on the other team's opposing defense, right? And, the turnover battle is always going to be huge. The decision making is also another one. Both of these quarterbacks are everything for their team, so they're going to be in the spotlight of pretty much the entire game. So, again, they're going to impact the game as well. And then you have the Eagles wide receivers, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, going up against the Ravens' questionable passing defense, right? They have been playing better. They did play the Chargers, who don't offer that much firepower. Same thing with the Steelers, but they didn't win that game. So this is arguably the best duo they're going to play at that wide receiver spot. It's close with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, but I would still opt for A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. So this is definitely their biggest test, and how well can they shut, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith out is going to be a huge factor. But with that in mind, I think I'm feeling more confident about the Eagles. I'm feeling more confident that they are going to give Lamar Jackson his second loss against an NFC opponent in his career. And it's mainly because of the duo that they're going to be facing, right? Because you have to put a lot of attention on them, right? If you imagine A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith get going, right? Then you start to overcompensate and bring more attention to them. Well, then that means there's less people in the box for Saquon Barkley and Jalen Hurts as well. So it's really such a tough conundrum to be in when you're dealing with that, especially when just individually man on man, the Baltimore Ravens passing defense has not been great overall. So you got to bring help, and then you're weak somewhere else. So because of that, I think it's going to be too much to overwhelm that Ravens defense, especially if Roquan Smith doesn't play. Then I think they're going to be in trouble. But one thing that I have to mention here before we move on is the fascinating idea that the Ravens clearly play better when they're in a lead, right? They keep Derrick Henry more involved. They keep running the ball with him, as opposed when they're down and they try to pass their way back into the game more often than not. We saw it against the Chiefs. We saw it against the Steelers, right? And it feels a little bit off in that regard. They don't use Derrick Henry. I'm fascinated to see how the Eagles deal with that, right? Knowing that the Eagles usually start these games slow, and the first quarter is definitely not their best quarter. If they let the Ravens get out in front of them, how do the Ravens deal with that? Do they just dominate the game from that point on with Derrick Henry? Or maybe the Eagles get out in front and kind of break that trend and force the Ravens to pass a lot more? I think that's going to be such a fascinating sort of chess match here. And even if the Ravens do go out in front, the fourth quarter and giving up big leads has not been something that, and giving up big leads is something that has been, attached to them. They give up the most fourth quarter touchdowns in the NFL to this point. So, even if they do have that lead, we talked about with the explosive plays and everything like that, how it just takes one play and the Eagles are all over you at one point. So that is something I'm definitely, keeping an eye on to see how this game develops and how the Eagles or the Ravens kind of make adjustments to that. So that is going to be probably hopefully it's not a case where we overhype it and it's just like 20 to 14 or something. But I'm really confident that this game is going to be awesome on Sunday. I can't wait to watch it. But on the topic of Sunday, we're going to get to the game picks. We're going to get to predicting all the games on Sunday. We split it up into two parts because we're not going to be on the rest of the week. So the last two segments, we're going to go through each and every game and talk about who we think is going to win. So don't go anywhere. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.